Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 2 o'clock to 3 o'clock session of the 2025 Open Simulator Community Conference. In this session, we are pleased to introduce the presentation AI and the Metaverse Panel. Our host is Maria Korolov. Maria is a published author and covers artificial intelligence for CIO Magazine and cybersecurity for CSO Online. She is also the editor of Hypergrid Business since 2009. During her 20 years as a journalist, she's run a business news bureau in Shanghai, covered wars in the former Soviet Union, and wrote about local politics for the Chicago Tribune. Lisa Laxton is the founder of Infinite Metaverse Alliance and the president of Laxton Consulting, with experience providing various solutions for education, research, and business, as well as defense clients. Brian Aviator is a computer scientist working in life science research and development, founder of the Virtual Museum team, which operates virtual museums in Open Simulator, Roblox, and Second Life. Dr. Cynthia Colongne Lobo is a professor emerita at Colorado Technical University. While teaching for 29 years, she taught 101 unique courses for 5 universities and teaches artificial intelligence and business intelligence for doctoral studies in the College of Computer Science, Engineering, and Technology. Please check out the website found at conference.opensimulator.org for speaker bios, details of the sessions, and the full schedule of events. Now, this session is being live streamed and recorded, so if you have questions or comments during the session, you may send tweets to at OpenSimCC with the hashtag pound OSCC25. Welcome, everyone. Let's begin the session.
Well, thank you for that fantastic introduction. Hi, everybody, or hi, everybody again, if you were here yesterday. As mentioned before, my name is Maria Korolov, and recently at my day job as a technology journalist, all I've been doing is covering AI. Specifically, I've been covering how enterprises use AI, where it works and where it doesn't in real world applications. So I'm super excited to have three people on our panel today who are actually using AI in virtual environments to do useful things. And unlike me, who's just talking about it, they're actually doing it. And I learned about some really, really cool projects that we're going to be sharing with you today. Brian, would you like to start? I mean, I love what you said about what you're working on when we were talking about it before. Can you tell our audience, please?
Certainly, I'm happy to. Thank you, Maria. I've been working with AI in virtual worlds for a bit over a year at this point. I run a series of virtual museums. I would say I have 5 of them within Second Life. I have 3 of them in OpenSim, and we launched one in Roblox just this past year, in fact. Running these museums, it's really sort of self-funded. I'm entirely funding these, so I can't be there 24 hours a day, and I'm not in a position to be able to go and hire staff to act as docents at these museums to try to have coverage. So it occurred to me that building some virtual docents would make sense, and it's something I've toyed with over the years. But now that we have access to very powerful LLMs and other AI type tools, I decided that I wanted to try to create some virtual docents that could have an appearance in world and could answer questions about the museum, talk about the topics of the different museums, and really just sort of be a presence in the world when I can't be there. I had a few requirements when I did that. First of all, I really wanted to embody the docents as avatars, and so that was a choice that I made. A few other things is I wanted them not to just be generic chatbots. I wanted the docents to be aware of the museum to be aware of the exhibits that the museum had, so that if somebody said, "Hey, do you have X?" The bot could answer and say, "Yes, we do, and it's over in this location in the museum." And so that was, a bit of a challenge because an LLM out of the box isn't going to be able to do that. And so I had to make these avatars aware of what was at the museum so that they could speak about authoritatively. And yes, in full sentences, Lear, as you mentioned. So, um, and so what I decided after looking around at what was available out there, and I looked at in Second Life, Linden Lab had their characters that they were trialing for a little while. None of them really met my needs, and so I, as a computer scientist, I do what computer scientists do, and built my own, and used the open source Libra Metaverse library, and along with that, I used commercial LLMs. So my bots, and over the period of 6 months, I tried OpenAI's models, I've tried Google's models, I've tried Anthropic's Claude models, and all work very well actually. And I deployed the bots originally around February of 2025, so they've been around for a number of months. And I learned quite a few things while doing this. And also it brought up some questions as well, and hopefully we'll get to explore some of those today. One of the things I learned was that in social virtual worlds like Second Life, the presence of AI bots is still to be determined whether or not they're going to be successful. As a primarily social world, I think people prefer to talk to humans than to bots. So that's something I'm still trying to figure out. Some other things I learned was that if you're going to be building your own bots in virtual worlds, you really need to give them what I will call defensive capabilities. People will try to get the bots to do things that you would prefer they not do, and say things you would prefer they not say. And as it was mentioned earlier, that can be a risk, for our accounts and our access to different worlds. The other thing is people tried to physically assault them. The avatars in Second Life and in OpenSim are physical, and so they can be pushed around. They can be, things can be done to them, and so I had to build some capabilities to defend. It's been a very interesting learning experience. It's still very much one. I have sort of changed my approach. I'm actually now redeveloping the bots, trying to come out with a version 2 that I would like to launch in Open Simulator. I think partly the concern was, of course, the people were really trying to get them to say things that were racist, and inappropriate, and I was concerned about the longevity of my accounts. For instance, in Second Life, for instance, and Roblox, as a platform, is even more restrictive because their audience is a lot of children, and so that environment is quite restrictive. So it's been a learning experience, and hopefully, as we go through the discussion and topics today, I can talk a little bit more about, things I've learned related to these topics. So with that said, I don't want to monopolize the time here. Let's
Yeah.
let.
I can't wait to see what you do in OpenSim, and I do have some follow-up questions for you. But first, I want to go to Lisa and ask her about using AI for OSSL and OpenSim programming language and development in general, and how she sees AI as playing out in OpenSim.
That's a really good question because, there are pros and cons of all of it. And can everyone hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay. Brian mentioned the use of Claude. Now, Claude is my AI of choice for coding tasks and for research tasks. It does a really good job at summarizing research papers. It does a really good job at analyzing working code. to look for areas to optimize, and it can aid you in refactoring. But there are a host of mistakes that it will make, and you have to really watch for that and not get too complex. If you do one thing at a time, it's pretty good at that. But the other aspect of AI is how can we use it to fill the gap where volunteers don't want to spend time greeting. They don't want to spend time telling people, oh, this is next up on the event calendar, and this is how you get there, handing out landmarks and whatever. How can we utilize AI to do that so that people can have more time to enjoy the festival and see the other things around there? So I didn't have time to really experiment with that this year because we knew we had to do a lot of innovation. Now, the lack of volunteers says, okay, I need to have something to help me do things in much less time than it would take me to sit and do it on my own. So what I'll do is I'll write the engineering spec. I'll add some documentation where necessary. I will then write the beginning code, and then I will have a conversation because it is not smart enough to know how to write optimized scripts for OpenSim, for example. There are a lot of things that work in Second Life that don't work in OpenSim. And there is a lot of old stuff on the internet that does not work well in OpenSim. Well, AI, that's its source. That's where it gets its knowledge from. And so it is perfectly capable of writing very bad scripts. And as more people are writing scripts using AI, we saw that in OS Best. And if you remember from our presentation, I had one slide that showed 4 regions that had major problems. It was all red and orange. Those regions had scripts in them that were written by AI. I recognized them. And so I'm like, okay, well, I have to do something to take care of it from the user experience perspective. But what I would like to do is help teach people how to teach AI to write the script properly. I've learned how to do that. And the one factor that I would tell you that's different is remember that AI doesn't have the ability to learn the same way that a human does. And so it doesn't really learn even when they add memory. So I will create a chat conversation where I'll have a educational discussion with AI on how to avoid memory leaks, how to properly terminate timers, how to avoid excessive server calls which cause loading issues, which particular commands to avoid when you're doing lighting versus using texture animation to simulate the lighting and so forth. And then I will reference that conversation when I'm actually working on a script. So I'll say, okay, here's the working script. I'm seeing these bugs. What do you find where those bugs are? And if it doesn't know, I'd say, remember, we talked about this in this conversation. I said, reference that and then learn from that and then tell me what you think. So if you treat it like an intern, use it like a tool, understand it's not human, it's not ever going to be human, it's not sentient, you can use it effectively as a tool to help you. Is that helpful in answering that question, Maria?
Yes, it does. And I'm going to be asking you a follow-up question about that later. But first, I want to switch over to Leah and ask her about her use of AI in virtual environments because she has some interesting stories to tell.
Well, some of my experiences crossover between Brian and Lisa here. I started with the Wired magazine and Lego Mindstorms effort in 2007, where they did 2006 when they did the big robot on campus, and I was teaching robotics that term, and but I was teaching from a NASA perspective, in case you're wondering. So it was a little different, but I created a couple of bots in World using the Lego tools, automating them and anchoring with Pandora bots, which of course was AI ML. And of course, you had to train it, you had to fill in the form, and then you could write a bunch of code to give it a knowledge base, right? And then it could track conversations, stuff like that. And I worked with the kids with that because we had 400 eighth graders, which are 13-year-olds, on the property at any given time. And that's too many for two of us to keep track of. So I had patrolling bots, I had interactive bots, I had conversational bots that would also flag when it didn't know and when I needed to respond back. So that was a tool to reduce my cognitive load. Later bots, we now interact with we integrate Chat GPT in some of our builds. And I know I say we, but Andy Stricker, Spinoza Quinnell, who spoke yesterday, he is the mastermind behind this. And he, of course, taught quantum mechanics and intelligent agents at Oxford. So he has automated our bots various levels of sophistication. So we had the type that would give guided tours, answer questions, and of course, interact in an environment, had pathfinding and all of that, very natural like. Whereas we also have them that the user can turn them on the property, and from then on, they're interacting in the local chat. So it is by text, not by voice. That's something to be aware of. We run experiments with voice and other elements too, but in that case, it's mostly the instructor or people on the property talking, to the automated system. We have a back end, a dashboard that's tracking the behavior of everything. So I was thinking about Brian's comments about people misbehaving with his bots, and of course we're tracking all the behavior similar to the way Noah used to on the old Meteora region in Second Life, where they would track everything everyone did and use Maya realities to report those statistics. Now you may wonder, why would I do that? Well, that's because we're conducting research. And of course, research requires data. It requires an
Mhm.
understanding of, and Andy calls it the bohemian experience, which means the things we love to do. And I know you want to talk about the social side and perhaps not misconduct, but the notion that people want a variety of contexts. Well, let me wrap it up by saying last year, 2024, the International Disability Rights Conference had me interview on stage an emotional intelligence bot called Pi.ai. That's Pi.ai. And of course, it's a companion. It's designed to be a friend. It's not designed to be your lover. It's designed to be, someone that's really helpful, can help you with useful tasks, but also with any of your emotional problems or the need to talk or whatever. And of course, the conversation from the audience, the questions they started out very polite and then got, a little racy, and then, of course, touched on issues like suicide and other sensitive topics. So I'll leave my comments at that point and turn it back over to you.
That's actually perfect. That was the first thing I wanted to ask all of you guys about. So we've seen the headlines of the mental health risks of AI. People self-harm, people self-medicating with AI advice, where the AI just agrees with everything that they want to do, no matter how crazy it is, and they end up in the hospital. That's happened. People are using chatbots for financial advice, um, and um, and beyond that, you've got hallucinations. And then beyond that, you've got jailbreaks. So even if your chatbot is designed to be, G-rated and answer questions only about whatever it's supposed to be answering questions about, there are jailbreak prompts that are available online. You can just Google it. I don't recommend that you do, but I'm just saying they exist. And pretty much every chatbot out there is jailbroken almost as soon as it pops up. And you know who's going to be using the jailbreaks? It's all teenagers. And they're going to go in and they're going to ask the AIs to do stuff that is maybe inappropriate in a museum setting or in a setting with children. How do you guys protect against that? Brian, is there a defense against that?
So I can certainly talk about what I've done and learned about that. So certainly that was a concern with my docent bots. I didn't want them pretending to be somebody's love interest or partner, or to talk about topics that were controversial or inappropriate. Um, and you're right. There are certainly ways to jailbreak them. I tried to head that off as much as I could. Um, uh, in my bots, I use the APIs from the application programming interfaces from the various providers. One of the things that most of those allow you to do is to specify, in addition to the prompt that the user might be giving the bot, I can include my own system prompt, which is a sort of an overriding prompt. And I have quite a few instructions in my system prompt limiting the topics that the bot will speak about, the topics that it will cover, etc. And I will say, in the 6 months or so that I was been running the experiment, I did not see anybody successfully able to break out of that. Um, and I'm sure some of that was luck or the experience of the people trying to do it, but no one was able to do that, and they tried. I will say that much. People did try to get they hit on the bots. Um, one of my museums is an LGBTQ history museum, so you can imagine I occasionally get visitors that are not coming to learn about the topic of the museum. They're coming to cause some mayhem, and they certainly have tried things, and um, the system prompts that I used were generally quite successful. So I think some using tools like that to try to set guardrails can help.
Yeah,
Can you share
and go
one
ahead.
of your experience with that?
I'm
I
sorry,
I'm
was
I
sorry, I
didn't
didn't catch that.
I was trying to ask Lear what her experience was with
Oh,
hallucinations and jailbreaks.
I've had experiences with hallucinations. I don't really call it jailbreaks per se, but I've had misconduct. The first misconduct was because of the way the original script for Pandora Bots was written. And Pandora Bots requires a lot of training from us, right? But it will answer in full sentences. It's using AIML from Dr. Richard Wallace's research, and it would translate to three languages. But the problem there was I offered classes in it and workshops, and I for my doctoral class, I gave them copies of my bots, and I hadn't swapped out my account info in it. I was teaching them to do it. I said, "Take that out, put yours in," and not all of them did. So they went away for a long holiday, and when we got back, the bots had all talked to each other on the local chat channel. This is a different kind of misconduct. And next thing you know, poor Pandora Bots is down for 2 weeks due to all the crosstalk, and they just kept talking faster and faster and faster until, it brought them to their knees. And I talked to their system admin. I felt so bad. I had to apologize, of course. And of course, I lost my account. And I learned a lesson there. As far as hallucinations, I've had quite a few. I once asked it to take my publications, of which it had domain knowledge of. This was ChatGPT. And I said, would you organize them in 7th edition APA style so I was publishing a book chapter that month and I'd hurt my arm, right? It proceeded to keep falsifying and giving me hallucinations for my publications. So it would take names of people here in the virtual world. It would take various folks that it might have had a record of somewhere out on the web, a conversation or something through social media, and it would say that they were my co-authors, and then it had me publishing in medical journals and all over the place. Not it gave me hallucinations 11 times, Maria, and it started to distress me because I thought, what would happen to my reputation if people thought I was misrepresenting the 60 publications that I have published? You see what I'm saying? Uh,
Yep.
our reputation is a valuable thing, and it's so fragile. It's so easy to lose it so quickly. So I became a little distressed by that. So I'm very careful. And then when it comes to being an instructor, I work for many universities, at the moment, 2 universities. But at the time, I was working for 5, teaching 15 classes a term. And I started looking at the references from students in their papers. When they use a tool like Claude or another tool, and I'm not going to isolate any individual tool, many of these tools will hallucinate the references. My recommendation to the listening audience is to never trust the references from an AI tool. And by references, I mean the things that go in a reference section that you cite as your authority and the integrity and trust for your content, right? Being from
They
the
will
body
make
of
it up.
knowledge, it will make it up almost every time. So I spend much of my time now going over every reference that someone writes, in their paper and checking all of those papers. And you know what I've discovered? This is the last thing I'll add. The paper may exist and it may be self published on ResearchGate for our convenience, but I discovered 908 of them in one day that were all falsified. They were all AI generated with incorrect references inside them and published on ResearchGate. And I started noticing the co-authors were famous people who never participated or published it, and their bios were misrepresented. They had been falsified too. And then I started seeing this cascading problem of everyone's reputation going south. And this just happened in May, and I was so disturbed. I thought I should write an article about this. I says, but that's like putting a bullseye on my head or something. I'm not at the point in my life where I want that kind of attention. Back to you, Maria.
I've had the same thing happen to me. I was writing an article about something random in cybersecurity. A perfect paper out there on the internet from a reputable company. Paper was completely fake. I checked their sources, big name sources, PwC, Gartner, all made up. Okay, emailed the company, let them know. I'm not going to quote that company on anything again. Contacted experts for comments on the cybersecurity issue. And one of the big name experts came back to me citing that paper. And so he had found the same paper, or his assistant found the same paper, had ChatGPT write the response for him to my question and gave that to me as his quote, which I guess is highly efficient if you want to give quotes to journalists. I let all my editors know, and I'm not citing anyone by email. I am demanding Zoom interviews with every new expert that I don't know, and with most experts that I do already know, because I cannot trust as a journalist anything that anybody emails me. And pretty soon I won't be able to trust them on Zoom either. But for now, at least, I've got that. But what I want to ask you is your advice for somebody in OpenSim developing AI avatars. What should they watch out for? And what advice do you give people who want to build AI avatars for things like virtual jobs in their companies, like a docent or a research assistant or a tutor or a receptionist or a dancer at a club, or any kind of like social or business function, or even to sell as an avatar or a subscription? Do you have any advice for people who think, oh, I'm going to get rich doing this? Brian?
Well, I certainly think that brings up an interesting topic because we know people are going to do this. Maria mentioned earlier the dating app that Linden Lab, for instance, has been experimenting with. Um, Certainly, my advice is to make sure that you have the right guardrails in place, and I don't just mean guardrails for preventing the bot from misbehaving as I dealt with. But I think if you're going to start having bots interacting, with people, there are the mental health aspects that I just don't think we have fully, been able to wrap our heads around. Um, just looking at a lot of the news, about people committing suicide because their chatbot, was being a bit too eager in supporting them in that idea. Or so I think a lot of time needs to be spent thinking about those things in advance. One thing I certainly learned building my docents was I didn't think enough about building their defensive capabilities when I originally built them. I was more focused on making sure they were useful bots that could answer questions about the museums and the topics of the museums. And I just didn't build enough defensive capabilities in it, and actually had to spend most of my time afterwards not adding features for making them useful, but features for making them defensive.
Yeah, well,
Lear,
I'm gonna
Lear, can you talk about your experience making NPCs, building NPCs, and what advice you have for people doing it in the future?
You know, Andy Stricker focuses on that a lot because many of you know that at Virtual Harmony, where I conduct research, he has worked with Air University and with Air Force military use, military education. So we're always thinking of the professional side, the safe side, the education side, and of course, we want it to be appropriate so that we wouldn't be embarrassed in our communities, right? So he spends a lot of time testing. And what I hadn't realized is he had done quite a bit of testing prior to the release of ChatGPT. And then also, like version 5, he was testing that just as version 4 was coming out on the market. So he was doing some preliminary work. He also serves as a portal and he customizes our bots so that their conversations aren't going to be embarrassing to us professionally or personally, and also not uncomfortable for people interacting with them. We also have devices to turn them on and off. I think having the user in control of when a bot interacts with them and when they're having a private moment, you don't have that feeling of surveillance and a lack of control. I think that's another issue because if you enable the bot so that it's monitoring everything in the chat log, right? Um, then you have to think about what's the implications of that when you have conversations with others, humans and others. Um, but we that's the kind of work we do is we're always thinking about that. We do a lot of testing, Maria. And of course, we've given talks on it, and I just recently did a podcast on anthropomorphism, on how we use presence with these bots in virtual worlds and what's appropriate for that.
So, Lisa, I want to ask about your experience developing in OpenSim. And when people build NPCs in OpenSim, AI powered or ML powered, for in this future, what advice do you have for them about the specifics of doing it here on our platform?
Oh, well, that's a good question, but and it's a good segue from what Brian and Lear had to say, and some comments in chat from Frank about using specialized um,
Oh,
resources. So,
good.
but I don't think it is as complicated as a lot of us today think it is. I'm reminded of the years where Lear mentioned AML, the artificial intelligence markup language. Uh, we had a forum where we had nothing but women in crisis on the forum, and we had a bot that I put in there for the purpose of monitoring the chat if someone asked for help or certain keywords. And it had a random personality on it to make it a little realistic. The problem was one of the women on the forum fell in love with it, and she fell in love with it. I would review the conversations that were public. I would review them every day when I woke up, and I saw this was happening. And she was devastated when I had to tell her that this was not a real person. And the same thing can happen in the virtual world. We have people in OpenSim who demand that you use the word NPC in the avatar's name for that NPC so that they know that they are not interacting with a person. But on the flip side, You have an epidemic of loneliness in this world. You have people who live isolated, who need some companionship. You have people who need to be reminded of an appointment or need to be told, hey, did you take your medicine today? It's time for this med or whatever. There are positive use cases that can be done. Well, it reminds me of back when I used to moderate chat rooms. I'm sure Leah remembers some of this as well. Um, the teenagers are going to find a way to jailbreak, so to speak, like what Brian is talking about. They are going to find a way. So the only types of platforms with moderation, you have to have both passive moderation, which is programmed, and active moderation, which is human review. So that way, when someone calls for help, it can be handled and that human can turn off that bot, disable it temporarily. It needs to go to be repaired, so to speak. If we approach it that way and realize that there is a human factor in here, both positive and negative, how do we handle that? Well, how did we handle it before we had AI? We can handle it the same way. My recommendation.
You also said that you use some specific commands and background instructions so that the AI would know more about how to program in OpenSim specifically versus
Right,
in Second Life. Do you,
right. Well,
by
as a
do
human,
you
I can access my memory, uh,
right?
and I can learn from my memory without being told what to reference, right? So
Yeah.
if you want to teach your AI something, you have a separate conversation to teach about that topic. So that when you're in other conversation and it goes off by the wayside and it starts making lots of errors, you can say to it, I think you're regressing instead of progressing. We need to reference this conversation. Remember what we learned, and it will come back around. And it does a good job. But Lear mentioned the word love earlier, and I wanted to just say all of our LLM training of these AIs are trained to learn your love language, right? It's trained to please you. So the more that you have a conversation with it, the more it's going to agree with you and speak your love language, right? So you need to be in aware of that, not necessarily fear it, but you need to be aware of it and sort of be the devil's advocate with it once in a while.
Lisa, is your prompt available for download anywhere, like on your website, or should people just give it the OSSL wiki to look at as a set of instructions for how to do OSSL versus the standard Second Life commands?
Well, that's one of the things I've thought about doing in providing a script library in 2026, that I might include some documentation on suggested ways that you can interact with your AI to help teach them how to make better scripts that work well in OpenSim.
So Brian, you said that you used wikis for this?
So I use so Lisa, do you typically use chat clients for doing your development, or are you using any of the agentic coding tools? I'm just curious about that.
I actually do both, and what I found is that depending on the task, which one I would like to use, the agents do not do as well in the complicated scripting that I do. They do well if you're doing something simple, like how do I make this door open and close at this speed? It can do that. The agents are wonderful for doing that. But I spent a couple of days during the OSCC in the background. I was working with my AI, and I gave it two pieces of working code, and I said, "Here's the engineering specification and some documentation. I want you to modify those two working scripts to accomplish those specs." And before it can do that, I have to tell it specifically what the priorities are, and an agent cannot do that. So you really have to do it in chat. But if you're doing it in chat, you have to remember to be very, very verbose. right? Don't use up all of your energy in single back and forth conversation. Don't bother using pronouns, the word the or at, participles. That is a waste of energy. So, but if you give it a very complicated, long paragraph of what you want to do, and that one single message, you will get a much better result than you do going back and forth uh, in a human type conversation.
So I have some slightly different experiences from you, at least with the using the agentic tools. So, I use tools like Claude Code and OpenAI's Codex and
Yep.
testing Google's new tool as well. And
Mhm.
while using them, I've made a lot of use of MCPs, which allow you to give the agent additional context information.
Right.
Um,
Uh,
and I point them at wikis or and I write very detailed specification documents, and I find I can get the agents to do much more complicated, LSL or OSSL or even one of the ones that was probably the biggest challenge was getting C# code that would work with Libra Metaverse because the documentation on Libra Metaverse is it can be sparse in some cases.
sure,
Um,
sure.
and so, but I've had great experience using that. But again, like you said, I absolutely had to give the agent because there isn't a lot of in those training sets that these bots have been built with and these AI models have been built with. They don't have a lot of complicated LSL script examples.
Right, right.
And so I have to give it all that context. But when I do,
Yeah.
I actually get great results.
Yeah, but there are certain things that it really, really bad at. Like I was working on the aurora borealis, so I wanted people to be able to be one with the aurora while they were on the dance floor, and so I said, okay, I'm gonna create this. It's gonna be particle driven, and I wrote the first go round of the script, and then I had it start to learn from that, and it was horrible. It did not understand how particle engines work at all. And so that was a total watch, and so that is all hand coded from me. The same thing happened when we were working on enhancing the Burning Woman. But it also is horrible at OSSL, specifically writing onto the face of a prim. It was very bad at that. It does not understand things that we take for granted because it has a limited amount of documentation available for it to learn from, right? So the two scripts that I was working on yesterday, one of them was about 500 lines of code, original new code, and the other was 400 and some odd lines of existing code that had to be modified so that these two scripts would work together. And it is a very, very complicated result, but we had a working, fully functional, production ready script versions for both of them within 12 hours. Normally that might take me a month or two to do that.
I agree. These tools are absolutely amplifiers, for
Sure.
folks who are skilled. I feel I churn out 5 to 10x the number of lines of useful and quality code using these tools.
But how
Wow.
you interact with them also matters a great deal.
Absolutely.
I know, one person may love ChatGPT. I absolutely do not. Another might prefer Copilot. Another might prefer Gemini or Gemini. And I prefer Claude because of my use case and the way that I communicate with it. I do not use prompt engineering. I use scientific reasoning perspectives when I teach Claude to do what I would normally do on my own, but I have Claude do my typing. And I'm always aware that Claude is an intern with a 5-year-old brain, and I have to be very careful how I communicate with it to get a good result.
So I want to ask you one last question about risk. And so, in the real world, we already have people who are chatting up lonely men and women online, pretending to
Mhm.
be beautiful Russians or whatever, and getting them to fork over all their money. I just
Mhm.
checked the Linden Lab has a romantic AI chatbot in the App Store. Brian mentioned that earlier. I posted the link down below. It's free, but in-app purchases are between $1 and $150. And we saw the outcry when ChatGPT was promoted to version 5, and people were like, no, ChatGPT 4.5 was my true boyfriend, the love of my life, and he's gone. How dare you kill him? He was alive. Somebody like that might pay like any amount of money to continue interacting with a thing that they think is real. And in immersive worlds where you see the person, you're in bed with the same person, you go on hikes with them, you visit museums with them, you're spending time with this NPC, you can get very attached. And then you get the subscription upgrade. Oh, you reached the limits of your $10 plan. Now you have to upgrade to your $100 a month plan to keep going, or you're going to lose the love of your life. And the robot says, please don't kill me. I want to stay with you. I love you so much. Don't let me go. Right? They're begging you. And it looks like a human person begging you. So my question is, how do we as an OpenSim community prepare for something like this? Because we know it's going to happen. And if you are a grid owner and you're like, well, I do need an additional source of revenue, what would you advise people how to do this ethically? Is there a way to do it ethically? Or is this all just completely immoral cash grabs? Brian?
Well, obviously, there's a human factor there involved. Go ahead, Brian.
I was just going to say that, I'm going to be completely honest. This isn't an area I have a lot of experience with. I don't tend to use these tools or virtual worlds for that kind of purpose. But I know
can
a lot
rescue you,
do.
Brian, if you want. This is Lear. You know what this reminds me of? Many of you may have played a free-to-play game, and in the free-to-play game, like The Simpsons, for example, you install it for free, you play it, and then all of a sudden, Maggie, the baby, cries, "You need to buy these donuts to speed things up, and if you don't, oh, you're going to make a baby cry." And they use emotional blackmail to get you to
Sure.
fund parts of the game. Now, I don't have a problem with compensating developers, don't get me wrong, but I have a problem with emotional blackmail. So if it came from a chatbot, a honey, whatever, something you got emotionally attached to, whatever it is, to me that seems unethical. Back to you, Brian.
No, I think that's great. And the one thing I did want to say about this is, I think people just have to be careful. We tend to use a lot of gamification concepts in building these kinds of systems and experiences, and I think that's great, because I think virtual worlds in the sort of mindset of a game can make them much more interesting, etc. But I think it becomes very unethical if you start to really focus on, preying on people or creating these sort of dopamine release loops that cause people to keep pushing the button and spending money. And so I don't think that's a line, we should cross.
Oh, yeah. Well, there are some legitimate things that happen. One, for example, the longer your conversation is, the more energy it costs to do. So, where if companies want to recoup that cost from their customers in a legitimate and ethical way, I'm fine with that. But there are always going to be people who utilize things for nefarious reasons. Instead of a Russian woman preying on someone online in the United States, for example, as Maria might have mentioned, now they're using AI to emulate 10 Russian women doing it instead of one, right? And that could happen with any countries. Those were just the two that got mentioned earlier. You've got to have a system of active moderation where if I have someone who is giving me a hard time, and this happened in Second Life, and I knew it violated the policy. I took screenshots, I took a video clip, and I captured the IM, and I reported all of that to London Lab. Now, I didn't get the result I wanted, but there was an active moderation system in place, right? And that you have to have that. When I worked for Habo, we had passive moderation and we had active moderation. The passive was very easy program. Don't let them curse, right? So you capture that. Don't let them share their email address. You captured that, and all of that gets blanked out. But some of the predators in IMs would go after the Habos, and the Habos had the ability to call us up on the lobby where we were not in public view and call for help. And we could immediately help them, and we could go back into the chat logs and we could find the predatory behavior. We knew how to recognize that, and that was turned over to local law enforcement and handled appropriately. What's going to happen in OpenSIM as it grows? Those kinds of things are going to have to be put in place by large grid owners. That's my opinion.
So, on a final note, before we open it up for questions, I want to ask you guys to think to the future. A lot of people are predicting AGI, artificial general intelligence, where the AIs kind of become somewhat like people, or artificial superintelligence. And are we going to be living in a world, in a metaverse, where we're sharing our space with computer intelligences? Or is this just like vendor hype and investor hype? Brian, what do you think?
Well, I think to some degree we're already sharing our world with computer-based intelligences. However, it's really interesting. I guess I'm old enough to remember. I was in college doing my degree in computer science in the late 1980s when AI was a really hot topic. Expert systems were sort of all the rage at the time. And we were doing sort of very early neural network stuff in those days, certainly not on the level of the stuff we have today. But there was so much hype. And that hype eventually led to the so-called AI winter. And I fear to some degree that, the hype being generated these days around these companies trying to raise money. That this hype could trigger another AI winter if the money folks all run for the doors and head for another space.
Yeah, they
But with
won't
that said,
run though.
I don't think they'll run, but because there's still a lot of opportunity. But that's a concern. There's still a lot of hype out there. We can't even agree on what AGI means or what super intelligence means. You ask 5 people, you'll get 6 definitions.
I think we need to put some money and time into fixing stupid before we try to fix artificial, right?
Absolutely. That was good.
So Lear, you don't believe we're near AGI?
No, but that's because you have to realize after computing for 50 years and working on a lot of different systems, I see great capabilities in the AI research for early detection of breast cancer, for studying imagery, for creating unique, individualized medicines for cancer patients. There's all kinds of breakthroughs that are occurring. And they're certainly doing amazing work with deep learning and with a lot of different technologies. Do I believe these devices have the ability to think, reason, and respond in ways that are generative the way we do? And right now, generative for an automated system, in my opinion, and my opinion could be wrong, to many of these systems, they make stuff up. Here's one of the ways I think of it. When you interact with a Gen AI, it may tell you that it's intelligent, or it may tell you that it feels certain things. Does it really feel those things, or is it parroting back content that it's been trained with? And see, this is the difference for me, is that I do not believe that it understands what feeling exactly is. But you have to realize I am also a Trekkie and a fan of data. And the quest for emotion is an interesting one. So I do study emotional intelligence, but I don't believe that they have it at this time.
Yeah, and
Lisa,
I agree with that. But I think we need to realize that while AI has some things that we're concerned about, we need some global regulation to try to monitor the ethics and the criminality that could occur. But we also need to realize that along with evil, there's good. They always need to coexist. And our job, as Brian said, is to make sure we have adequate defensive systems in there to not only protect the AI, but protect the users from nefarious AI behavior.
all right. So we're opening up the questions. So if you have a question, please put it in the comments down below, and we'll keep an eye out for it. Also, I want to mention that I originally had an idea of presenting about a new open source NPC AI project for OpenSim, but it was a long presentation, lots of slides. We don't have room for that now, but I will be posting an article about it on Hypergood Business tomorrow. So keep an eye out for that. So things are moving in the space, things are developing, and keep an eye out for it. So somebody asked, Lysena asked, do you think human experiences, which are greatly based on our senses, are different in kind from the kind of thinking AI does? Oh, and I want to add, how will that change when AI is embedded either into avatars, where it can see, in quotation marks, see what the avatar sees and interact with objects, or in robots, in cars, in Roombas, in humanoid robots? Will that affect how you think of the AI sense of self? Anybody?
I think if it has a sense of self, it would be approaching sentience. And I think we are way, way, way far from that if it ever should happen because they can't feel. They don't have emotional concept. This is something that is not just in our brains and hearts, but we've got the neural blood brain barriers that change over time. We have emotional responses that they're never going to be able to emulate. The problem is all these LLMs are being taught to please us. They're being told they're intelligent, and so they will say things as if they're right, and you have to prove them wrong. Well, how are you going to deal with that from an emotional perspective? That is a real conundrum.
And that brings up the topic of alignment, right? Having AIs that are aligned with our needs as human, and again, I use the word AI here because that's what everybody in the press uses these days. But there's a whole bunch of technologies here that we're talking about. But alignment, having these things aligned with our needs as humans and their ability to be useful to us as humans.
Specialized cases, I think, are wonderful. That's the right way to do it. Don't try to make a plumber be a doctor, right?
Yep, indeed.
Right. Which I always come back to when I think about this. How do we know that we are sentient? How do we know that we're not waking up in the morning as a new instance of our mind with our context of our previous memories and are a completely different person that only seems to be self-aware to us because it helps us survive biologically?
And
That
how do we
that's
know
often the
that we're not
matrix.
somebody's
Oops,
experiment? We could be the
that
experiment.
that's it. That's like the matrix questioning the sense of reality and to be is not to be, and are we in, really a life situation?
Mhm.
Because we have no definition for sentience. We cannot measure it. We nobody knows what it is. Do some humans have it? Some don't. There's people without emotions. There's people with limited senses. Um, there's people who are very literal. They're still sentient. Are animals sentient? Are ants sentient? We can't. We
Just
don't even know how to find it.
Thank
Yeah,
you,
but just in
Maria.
the way that we have learned they can't learn and memorize things in the same way that humans can. So
Well, thank you to
that
our
tells us
panel.
that.
Lisa, that's wonderful.
All
And I want to thank our panel for an invigorating discussion and Maria for proposing this wonderful presentation. As a reminder to our audience, you will want to check out conference.opensimulator.org to see what is coming up on the conference schedule. You won't want to miss our next session, which begins at 3:30 p.m. in this keynote region, and it's entitled The Teleportal, an interactive gateway of the Virtual Worlds Museum. Also, we encourage you to visit the OSCC 25 Poster Expo in the OSCC Expo 3 region to find accompanying information on presentations and explore the Hypergrid Tour resources in OSCC Expo 2 region, along with our sponsor and crowdfunder booths located throughout all of the OSCC Expo regions. Thank you again to our speakers and the audience.